Okay, today we're looking at applying fertiliser. We'll be using potatoes that are just coming up, and when you apply fertiliser you have to have a look at how much of the actual fertiliser is in the actual packet. So what we've got here, we've got 777, that's the nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium that's in a fertiliser. And what that tells you is there's only 7% is actually nitrogen, 7% phosphorus and 7% potassium. So if you, for example, had to put 10 grams per metre squared on an area and you thought, oh, I'll just put 10 grams of this on, you're only getting 7%, 0.07 in every time that you put it on. So it's not enough. So what we have to do, we have to calculate the amount we require, because it's going to be more than, let's say if we're putting 10 grams on, we're going to have to put a lot more on to make sure we get the right amount. So we have to do a little bit of maths just to make sure we're getting the right amount. So let's just say that we were going to put 10 grams per metre squared around our potatoes. So what we would do, a little calculation, the fertiliser requirement we need equals the grams per square metre. Well, in our case we're going to use 10 times, and then there's 7 over 100%, but what we do is we turn that up the other way to make the calculation work, and if we multiply that out, the fertiliser required equals 10 times 100 over 7, and it comes out at 143 grams per metre squared. So we've got to apply 143 grams of this per metre squared in order to get 10 grams of nitrogen. Okay, so once you've done the calculation, the next thing we need to do is to make sure that we have got that amount per metre squared. So we've marked out a metre squared here, so it's slightly longer than it's wider, but it is a metre squared. And what we're going to do is we're going to apply the correct amount to this area, so you can then see the distribution pattern. And once you know roughly what it looks like, the distribution, you'll know that you're applying the right amount without having to weigh it out every single time. You can print out a little sheet of paper which has got your distribution on it. Let's have a look at the next stage then. So I'll just get my scales. So what I'm going to do is, with my scales, I'm just going to put the tare, or the particular receptacle you've got, I'm going to press the tare button to zero it, and then what I'm going to do is to put 143 grams into that plastic container. Okay, that's just a little bit over, so just put a little bit back, and then I've got my, that is 143 grams. Now if you want to, this isn't too dusty, but if you want to, you can use a dust mask if you're worried about the dust. Which is a good idea, and you've got some gloves if you're handling it, because some of these fertilisers have sulfates in them which aren't good, especially if you've got a crack in your hand. So we've now weighed that out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to distribute it so you can see the distribution pattern. And what we normally do, whether we're applying grass seed or fertiliser, we put half of it, or roughly about half, I won't quite get half of it in my hand. And then what I'm going to do is sow this one way, so half of it one way, and then you get another handful and you go the opposite way. And then whatever you got left, you just do that on the diagonal. Okay, and that is your distribution pattern which will give you 10 grams per metre squared using grow more. Now you might be using another fertiliser which might have 30% nitrogen, which you won't need as much. So you've always got to look at the percentage on here. Now what I'm going to do is to take a photograph of that distribution, so when I'm applying my fertiliser I know what it looks like. I can put a piece of paper down by the side of what I'm doing and I can see, yeah, that's about right, that's about 10 grams, or if I need a little bit more I can add a bit more. But that's what we call calibration, where you're calibrating the amount of fertiliser you require to get the right amount per metre squared. What we then do is we have a look at whichever vegetable we're applying it to. For example, runner beans won't need much nitrogen because they produce their own nitrogen. But plants with bigger leaves like cabbage and potatoes will require quite a lot. Carrots not so much of the leaf, but they'll require a bit more phosphorus and potassium. So we have to look to see what each crop will require before we apply it. So what I'm going to do, we'll photograph this and we'll have a look at the next stage later. So what we did earlier, we calibrated to make sure that we were applying the right amount of fertiliser per square metre, and on this diagram here you can see that was our distribution rate. And so it's quite a lot, 10 grams per square metre, about 143 grams of grow more. So I'm going to apply that around each of these cucumber because they've got big green leaves, they're going to need quite a bit of nitrogen. They also require quite a lot of phosphorus for the root development and potassium for the development of the cucumbers. So it's got fruit, flowers for the potassium, the roots need phosphorus, and the nitrogen into the green leaf. So I'm going to apply it as a top dressing. Now when you're applying the grow more, you don't want to get any on the leaves because that's going to scorch the leaves. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to water it in afterwards to make sure that these plants get a really good watering. So I'm just going to put like a top dressing of fertiliser around each one. You can incorporate fertiliser if you want to into the whole, but just making sure these are getting a good start. And you see it's quite dense, the pattern if you like of the fertiliser. What you don't want is the fertiliser to be too strong and water passes out of the plant and they get scorched. It's what we call osmosis, where it's actually doing it in reverse. So just get a bit of fertiliser around each one. This is very low concentration grow more. A good watering in these plants. And I'm just going to melt it round a bit for the fertiliser. Could have brought the rose for the can and that would have just melted a bit either. But making sure that these get a good soaking. Now remember that cucumber like it nice and humid. That's why they prefer that. Tomatoes not so humid. So it's normally slightly different conditions for cucumbers to tomatoes, but we often grow them in the same polytunnel of course. But cucumbers do love it nice. Lots of humidity. So I'm going to give these a good start and I'm going to check my irrigation system tomorrow. It's solar powered, so it's sort of charging up today. Okay, so what we've done here to help us on the allotment with irrigation, you can see we've put a polycarbonate roof on top of the pergola, so that collects the water in obviously the guttering. It drops down through here. This is our main tank for where it stores irrigation. That's absolutely full. And so what we've then done, this is facing south, we've got our solar pump, and when that's fully charged that will suck the water up through here into the pump, into this mechanism, and then that pumps it out to our capillary tubes which are next to each of the cucumbers. So hopefully that'll be working. I'm going to have a look at it tomorrow just to see that that's all working fine.